We are clearly living in a time of extremes, a time of lots of duality, right? Like Dickens wrote in his novel, it was the best of times, but it was also the worst of times. And so I wanted to cover some important things that surround the COVID-19, but also very importantly, I wanted to talk about a big shift that I believe is coming for us as a species. So let's just get into it. First off, COVID 19 comes from corona, which means the family of viruses. VI stands for virus, D stands for disease, and 19 stands for the year it was first discovered. And it used to be called other names like Wuhan virus. It's the same virus that they're talking about, but they have removed the Wuhan part of the equation because Wuhan is a city where this appears to have originated, but they never want to label viruses for the place where they originated because it obviously gives a bad rep to the place, right? So, what exactly is this virus? Well, I like Rudolph Steiner's take on this, and keep in mind that Rudolph Steiner was around when there wasn't any evidence of the viruses. We couldn't observe them. We hadn't really, researched them. But he spoke of viruses as basically excretions of the cells, or poison from the cells, or poop from the cells, which is basically what you see. It's sort of a degenerated RNA or DNA coding that is actually not live. It's a molecule, but it lasts a very long time on surfaces. We'll get to that, but it has those little spikes which we have all seen on the pictures, and that makes it a lot more contagious. It can be carried very easily to other cells, and then once that cell reproduces, then you have a problem because it starts reproducing with that RNA and DNA. Another important thing on everybody's mind is it really that dangerous? Is it really that deadly? There are several statistics running around that I found to be interesting. First off, there's the World Health Organization, which initially put these at a death rate of 3.4%. I believe that is highly, highly, highly exaggerated. Because so many people, so many of us actually are asymptomatic. In other words, we don't even notice. And if we don't even notice, we probably had the virus, or we are going to have the virus at some point, but not even report it because we're not going to get tested. We're not going to do anything, right? So this is the reason why I feel that a statistic is probably wrong. There is a statistic that I found which I find to be more accurate from the Nature of Medicine journal, and this places the death rate at around 1.4%. And I'll include these because you're going to notice in both of these the people who have actually immune compromised systems, or the people who are older, they tend to have, they tend to be a lot more at risk. Small children are not at risk that much. I mean, that doesn't mean that you have, you're going to go out and expose them, right? But it's not as likely. I mean, children, their cells just completely change every couple of days. So I think that the ones that are going to be more affected by it are people who have those conditions. In fact, in Italy, they did a study where they studied cases on coronavirus, and they discovered that over 50% of those cases had 3 or more underlying conditions. So their immune system was already, charged with a whole bunch of other things. And but anyway, the last one that I wanted to give you, and this is this is an estimation based on the fact that, as I was telling you, most of us go asymptomatic. We're not gonna, go reported. We're not gonna. So because of this, some doctors have actually placed this death rate at around 0.25 to 0.625. So if you consider that the flu, a bad flu season is around 0.85%, 0.83%, somewhere around there. I mean, the coronavirus can be anywhere, in my opinion, can be anywhere between half and 1.4%, right? Now, what worries the authorities the most is the exponential rate at which this is being carried from one person to another, from one surface to another. And this is the reason why we are being asked to, do social distancing, which we are being asked to quarantine ourselves. And it is not necessarily for the good of a few people, it's for the good of the majority of people, for, the people who cannot, fight off this virus easily. So this is the reason why we are doing this. We are protecting the other people who, who are or might have trouble with this virus. Now, the most common symptoms that you'll find are dry cough, fever, and shortness of breath. If you have these symptoms and you're not feeling good, and it's definitely a good idea to look into this. And some symptoms that seem to show up sometimes are headaches, aches and pains, and sore throat. But it's not as common. Now, very rarely has diarrhea or runny nose being reported. So if you have runny nose, probably don't have the coronavirus. If you have diarrhea, you probably have something else, okay? And has not been reported for people to be sneezing. So if you have some sort of cold and you're sneezing, it's very likely that you're not going to have the coronavirus. You have something else, right? But it's not the coronavirus. Now, another important aspect, which is the reason why we are being cautious in all of these situations, what I always think, and if you only take one thing out of this video that you consider useful, is to be cautious, but not fearful. Okay? So you want to wash your hands, you want to do a whole deal of many things, which we're going to cover in just a second. But you don't want to be fearful, like, oh, it's the end of the world. This is not the case. Okay. Now, how exactly is this virus transmitted? Well, it can be by physical contact. And this is the reason why it makes sense for us to distance ourselves. A good 6 feet is enough. So we can be out on the streets walking and, running, jogging, etc. If you encounter the neighbor, you can talk to the neighbor, just keep your distance, keep your 6 feet of distance is what authorities are recommending. Now, there are also airborne droplets. So these airborne droplets last up to 3 hours, okay? And you want to be mindful, especially if you are in a cold weather, because the virus will last longer in cold temperature. Once there's some sort of heat, in general, viruses don't like, because of the antiviral properties of the sun, viruses don't tend to do well in tropics and in warm weather. Another important thing, which is different from other viruses, is that on surfaces, it can last a very long time. For example, it can last on cardboard, it can last up to a day. And on stainless steel and plastic, it can last 2 to 3 days. So, it makes sense to clean, those surfaces frequently if you weren't doing so already. And of course, it is also transmitted by feces. So you don't want to be in public bathrooms. You want to try and wash your hands as much as possibly, thoroughly after going to the bathroom, etc. Which are the typical things that you would want to do anyway, right? It's just now you have to be completely mindful of this and really, amp up that effort. A big question that is on everybody's mind is, how do I avoid it? Well, I've spoken before about stress. This is, for me, the number one killer in America. And so it becomes even more important that you work on your stress levels, that you learn how to breathe properly, deep breaths. If you don't know any breath technique or anything, you can do 5-5-5. So you 5 in, you hold the breath for 5, and then you release for 5. And you can do that if you do that before nighttime, for example, or at the very first, one of the first things you do in the morning. It's great. I actually do breathing that I learned from Wim Hof, the Iceman. But you don't need to, whatever breath technique that you find is, is appropriate for you, that's the one that you should use. There's also a breathing technique, which is 4-7-8. It's the exact same thing. You inhale for 4, you hold for 7, and then you release for 8. And both of those work, very well. So any technique that you want to do, anything that you can do to work on your stress, now is the best time to apply all these things. Now, another thing that, of course, with touching the surfaces and everything, you want to wash your hands. More than often. What soap should you use? Any soap that you use will actually eliminate the virus. But you want to wash. If I have to go out of the house, I come back in, and the first thing I do, I wash my hands. And I actually, just as a precaution, because I am trying to be cautious, I put the clothes, in the dirty clothes bin, and then I change my clothes. And I just feel like that makes for good practice, and it will contribute to the virus slowing down from my perspective. Another important thing is, if you're going to cough or if you're going to sneeze, remember to do it, covering your doing it towards your armpit, or covering your mouth. And you don't want to put your hand, because then you have the virus or whatever you have that your body just excreted in your hand. So you don't want to do that, because then you might touch your face, etc. Right? Social distancing is important, because remember, this is not social isolation. You can still chat with people, you can still call people up, and you can still have your own little gathering with your own family in your own home. And it can be the best of times or the worst of times, depending on how you approach this. Cleaning surfaces is actually quite important these days, because as I said, the virus can last up to 2 to 3 days. So some mixes that I found is that accelerated hydrogen peroxide seems to be the most effective. There's also a combination of 10% vinegar, 10% malt vinegar, and 3% hydrogen peroxide, which some people have reported work quite well. This is from Mercola, by the way. Mercola is a very famous natural medicine website by Dr. Mercola. And the other thing, I don't particularly like chlorine, but this is a time when, because you want to eliminate the virus as much as possible, chlorine makes sense to some degree. Now, one important thing with this cleaning is that you don't want to go berserk about it. Okay, you're not going to be able to sterilize, an environment to the fullest, right? And that can also lead to negative things. Actually, if you were completely sterile, you would be dead, because we actually need those viruses and those bacteria. Think about this. Back about 40 to 50 years ago, in medicine, in medical school, they would teach doctors to actually sterilize the guts. The purpose, that some practices had, was to sterilize the gut by the use of something called chloramphenicol, which is an antibiotic. Now, of course, and fortunately, doctors were not successful, and they realized that it was a bad idea, right? It's a bad idea to eliminate and sterilize your gut, because then you would die. And keep in mind, with viruses, for all those people who are very afraid of viruses or everything, remember, you want to be cautious but not fearful. With all of these viruses, 9 to 11% of the hard protein coding genes in our biome are actually retrovirus, which are considered the worst viruses possible, the most dangerous, etc. Right? But they're inside, and keep in mind, if we were to collect the different types of bacteria and viruses and put them against a human cell, they would outnumber us by, I think the number is about 1 and then 32 zeros to 1. So that's a fool's errand. And that's all I wanted to say. And I'm sorry to get distracted with this. But you want to clean surfaces, you want to wash your hands, you want to do all these things, but you don't want to go overboard that you are every 15 minutes, because I don't think that's the necessary approach. Now, are there successful treatments that you can consider? Well, there's one that is absolutely proven, which they have already started using in some places in the US, and they it came from studies in China, where they are already realizing that high doses of vitamin C actually work quite well. Now, the dosage, I'm going to leave it up to you to find out and consult your doctors. But some people recommend about 3,000 milligrams. And the most potent one that I found is the liposomal vitamin C. Of course, if that's not available, just grab any vitamin C that you can, right? It will become available soon. But vitamin C is definitely, a proven thing for coronavirus treatment. Now, there are other things that work really well for cold, flu, influenza, pneumonia, all these things. And it's important to check them out. Now, vitamin D3, it regulates more than 2,000 genes. Vitamin D3 is nothing more than the sun. So, sun exposure, but also just increasing your intake of vitamin D for this period of time is going to probably, boost your immune system so that, if you encounter the virus, it will be no problem. And Dr. Pollack, who has a website and everything, he recommends, and I'll include these links for you guys to check out. He recommends around 10,000 IUs of D3. D3, by the way, because it's the sun and it has the antiviral properties, you can realize most of us get sick normally during the famous flu season is when you have more parties, you increase your intake of sugar, but you also decrease your exposure to sun because the sun is, is less and less on the horizon. So this is also correlated. So that's why vitamin D3 makes a lot of sense to me. Now, some other people have recommended zinc. That might also be a strategy for you to explore. And the amounts actually vary very, very much in this case because it depends on the one that you get. But you want to get the most bioavailable possible, the one that, is more absorbable. And there's also significant evidence of elderberry and mushrooms. Mushrooms have been researched more than pharmaceutical drugs, like especially reishi mushroom, for instance. It's just antiviral, it's antibacterial, it's a very powerful herb. Now, some people are concerned about taking the test or not taking the test. Of course, I encourage you to follow your own path and consult with your medical professional. However, I can tell you from the basis of how the test is built, like Dr. Thomas Cowan actually speaks about this. The test is actually supposed to grab a piece of the virus, and which is unique to that virus, and it doesn't exist in other viruses. The trouble with the test is it appears that in order to actually spot whether you have the virus or not, they accelerate it through cycles. But this is something weird. If you do 30 cycles or 35 cycles of that test, everybody would turn out to be negative. Like nobody would have the coronavirus. But then if you turn out to do more cycles and you go to 60, apparently all of us would have the virus. So doesn't seem to be a unique way of testing. So I would only I would just use caution but not fear when you're going to decide these things. So now that we've covered all of these topics, I did want to spend a few minutes talking about a big shift that I think is coming for mankind. I think it's a positive one. It's coming on society, the way we see society, the way we see our lifestyles, the way we see our economy. And I think if I were, from my position, I am taking this time to actually reflect on first that we are very resilient individuals. We are very resilient species. We are not the strongest on the planet. The intelligent part is like, I don't know, we might be the most intelligent, species on the planet. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I definitely know that we are among the most resilient ones. We have survived so many things, scarlet fever, the Black Death, the bubonic plague, everything, we have survived so many things. And whenever there is these things, you can see it as an opportunity to change. And I choose to view it as a challenge to grow more internally, to spend more time with the kids instead of more time on the outside world. Isn't it time to have more faith in yourself? Isn't it time to lift each other up, instead of bring each other down, right? So I want to leave you with that message. I believe this is a time to bring positive change. And the way to bring positive change is to change yourself, to work on yourself, to really, dedicate those times to yoga, meditation, whatever you feel will be of personal growth for you. And so that when this whole thing is over, we have a mankind 2.0, okay, instead of a mankind -1 or something, right? I hope this has been helpful, and if you have any experiences with the what you're experiencing right now, I would love to hear about them. Please put them down in the comments, and remember to like and share with somebody you love. And I do have a Patreon page in case you want to pitch in. I will also include a link to that. I'm going to include links to all of the stuff that I talked about today so that you can go research on your own. Thank you so much and have an amazing week.